Some stories begin with love. Some begin with loss. And some begin the moment everything falls apart. This is Scarlett After Dark. Scarlett After Dark.
I'm Scarlett Stone. This is The Unraveling, a story about a secret affair, a dissolving marriage, and what it cost to want the wrong man. Let's get into it. Chapter 24, Rock Bottom. I stayed in North Carolina through mid-December. My birthday came around Thanksgiving. I was so depressed I canceled whatever Melissa had planned for me. I ended up house and dog sitting for a friend of hers, a favor, a way to make myself useful, a reason to be somewhere. This is how I spent my 57th birthday. Alone in a stranger's house that smelled like cat pee. I was in a dark place, not metaphorically, genuinely, seriously dark, in a way I hadn't been before and didn't have the tools to manage. Very few people reached out. A friend here, a message there, surface level, perfunctory, the kind of check-in that grazes the top of things without ever going underneath. Sophie reached out from Europe, but kept it breezy. I needed depth, real friendship. Someone who would ask the actual question and sit with the actual answer. Nobody did. Courtney called and sang happy birthday, the way she did every year without fail. Her voice on the phone was the realest thing that happened that day. Familiar and warm and completely hers. The same voice that had been singing the same song to me my entire life. I held on to it longer than I probably let on. Later, I texted Angelica, told her I was sad, that I wished I could be with Mom and Dad, both of whom were now gone, that I was struggling in ways I didn't have the words for. She texted back warmly, and then flowers and champagne arrived at the door. A beautiful gesture, technically. Expensive, thoughtful in the way that money can approximate thoughtfulness. But she didn't pick up the phone. She didn't call. She fixed it the way she fixed everything, with something tangible and purchasable delivered to the door. No voice required, no presence required, no sitting in it with me required. Just a box that said, I acknowledged this, and nothing more. That's who she is. Avoidant. Money is her language. It always has been. I sat in that cat pee house and took stock of my life. And then Thanksgiving came. Last year at this time, my mother was still alive. We hadn't known, none of us had known, that we had weeks left with her. The first Thanksgiving after she died had been muted, all of us numb, nobody wanting to do much, the holiday passing quietly like something we were getting through rather than celebrating. That numbness had been its own kind of protection. This year, the protection was gone. This year, I was alone in a stranger's house in North Carolina, a year out from her death, and the grief had sharpened rather than softened. That's what the second year does. Strips away the buffer of shock and leaves you with just the absence, clean and permanent and impossible to argue with. I kept reaching for the phone to call her. I kept putting it down. The house smelled like cat pee, and outside it was getting dark, and somewhere my family was gathered around tables I wasn't at, and my mother wasn't anywhere anymore. Melissa invited me to her family's Thanksgiving. A generous table, more than 30 people, noise and laughter, and the specific chaos of a large family gathered together. I was grateful. I was also profoundly, achingly lonely in the middle of all of it, surrounded by people and completely alone in the way you can only be alone when you're carrying something no one in the room knows about. I had done this, all of it. I was creating my own scenario, no one else to blame, just me. And I was, it seemed, becoming exactly what Angelica had warned me about, and my father had always predicted. A victim, a loser, a 57-year-old woman who had once had a flourishing career, made real money, had a home and a job and a solid foundation, and was now house-sitting in a stark house in North Carolina that smelled like cat pee, spending her birthday alone. I thought about David. Of course I did. Him sitting in some fancy Central Park West apartment with expensive things all around him, laughing it up at dinner, life moving along exactly as he'd designed it. He had always gotten what he wanted, always landed softly, gone through years of this, the affairs, the back and forth, the careful management of multiple women, and never once been caught, never once had to account for any of it. Just out there winning, the way men like him always win, the world arranged to accommodate them at every turn. I'd sit in the dark and paint scenarios, dinners he was having, weekend trips, the easy comfort of a life that had never really been disrupted, and wonder, still, whether he ever thought about me. Whether I crossed his mind the way he crossed mine, daily, reflexively, like weather. I couldn't get myself out of the slump. I kept asking why. I'm better than this, stronger, more resilient. I have always been the woman who walks into rooms and owns them, who builds things from nothing, who survives. So why couldn't I lift myself out of this? Instead of reaching out to people, I withdrew into a shell, into a small, dark room inside my own head that barely let anyone in. What had once been a wide, vibrant playground, my life, my world, my energy, had contracted to something barely habitable. I was disappearing into myself, and I knew it, and I couldn't seem to stop. It was during this stretch that I started to seriously contemplate taking my own life. I want to say that plainly because it was plain. The holidays do that to people. The gap between what the season is supposed to feel like and what it actually feels like can be unbearable. And I had never been vulnerable to it before, not like this. But this year I was. I was coming undone, bit by bit, more every day, in a way that wasn't healthy and had no clear bottom. The unraveling had become its own momentum. And it was all my own doing, which made it worse. You can't be angry at anyone else. You can't point outward. You just have to sit with the fact that you walked yourself here. After Thanksgiving, I found myself yet again sitting in my dark room, wallowing. And then Colin called. 2 things in one phone call, not spread out, not given room to breathe, just 2 things landing on top of each other, on top of everything else that was already open and raw. The first, he was transitioning. He had felt this way for a long time, he said, and he wanted to start hormones. I want to be clear. I am not opposed to transitioning. I believe people have the right to live as who they are, and I would never want my child to suffer in silence. But I know my son. I know his patterns. Colin has always been impulsive, moving fast, deciding quickly, feeling certain, and then recalibrating. This was the first I was hearing any of this, and now suddenly he wanted hormones? It was too fast. The speed of it alarmed me more than the thing itself. I asked him to see a therapist for at least 6 months first, to sit with it fully, to know himself completely before making permanent changes. He said he'd felt this way for a long time. I heard him. I also knew him. I said what I said, and I meant it, and I told him I loved him. And then the second thing, Angelica. Sitting at her Thanksgiving table with my best friend's kid, surrounded by family and friends, had made me the punchline. Just started in on me, openly, casually, like it cost her nothing. She had high-fived my best friend's kid and said, "Yeah, you don't want my sister staying with you." Another blow. Another one. It upset Colin deeply that she would do this, and it devastated me. On top of the transition news, on top of the suicidal thoughts, on top of the birthday alone in the cat pee house, on top of my daughter not speaking to me, the divorce, the homelessness, no job, no money, no parents left to call, on top of all of it, this, my sister, laughing about me at her Thanksgiving table while I was living out of a car 3 states away. It landed somewhere I was already bruised. There was no clean place left to absorb anything anymore. This was a woman whose entire 5-year divorce I had shown up for, completely, without judgment, without conditions. And she was making me the punchline. I didn't deserve that. It was mean, childish and mean. And it clarified something I had been slowly arriving at for months, that the coldness I had been feeling from her wasn't circumstantial. It was just who she was. I hung up and went even further into myself. The dark room got darker. The wallowing deepened. I sat with my son's news and Angelica's cruelty and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has run out of room to put anything else. The only things that pulled me back were Goddess and Melissa. Goddess was having a moment. Holiday sales coming in, product moving, my phone lighting up with orders in a way that made me feel, briefly and repeatedly, like something I had built was actually working. I was driving to UPS every day to ship them out. Concrete, purposeful, mine. It was the one part of my day that felt like forward motion. And Melissa, the sweetest, kindest person. She showed up every day without making a production of it, without attaching conditions or keeping score. She just showed up. That meant more than I have the words for. I knew I had to pack up and head back east. I was dreading it, dreading Angelica's house, dreading the atmosphere of it, dreading having to bite my tongue knowing what she'd been saying about me. But I had doctor's appointments and needed to be in the city, and there was nowhere else. So I reached out and told her I was coming back, that I'd need to stay for a bit over the holidays. Her response wasn't, of course. It was, only if it's a couple of weeks. That solidified it. The joke at the table, now this. It wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't circumstantial. This was who she was. Someone who could high five over my misfortune. Not someone worried about me. Someone managing me. It wasn't about the 2 weeks. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to. It was the coldness of it, the calculation, the measuring out of how much of her space I was allowed to occupy at the lowest point of my life. Unthinking, unemotional, just like her. The same woman who had mailed flowers and champagne instead of picking up the phone. The same woman who fixed everything with money because money required nothing of her emotionally. The same woman who had been my best friend my entire life and was now, in my worst year, the person I trusted least. A therapist I saw last year told me I needed to stop expecting her to give me what she simply isn't capable of giving. That it wasn't about love. She loved me. It was about capacity. She doesn't have the emotional vocabulary for what I need from her, and she probably never will. Expecting it anyway is just a way of hurting myself on a schedule. I knew the therapist was right. I also knew that knowing something and feeling it are two entirely different things. And I was a 57-year-old woman who needed her sister and didn't have her. And the knowing didn't help much. I packed my car, pointed it east, told myself it was temporary. I was still telling myself that. Chapter 25. Back to New York and dreading it. The drive back was packed, somehow even more jammed than the drive down, which I couldn't entirely account for. More product, more accumulated life, more evidence of the months I'd spent there. I pointed the car east and drove. The night before I left, Melissa and I had one last dinner together. It was warm and familiar, the way our time together had been, and then something shifted. We got to talking about work, about what came next, about how I was going to land. At some point, she suggested I consider retail, shop work, something in that vein. I understood what she was trying to say, that any job was a job, that pride had to take a back seat to practicality. But that's not what I heard. What I heard was judgment. I wasn't above working. I have never been above working. I would have walked into a shop tomorrow if it made sense, but it didn't. Not at this point. Not in these circumstances. A shop job wouldn't touch my bills, not even close. I had credit card debt, car payments, insurance, legal fees, court orders, the ongoing financial wreckage of a life mid-rebuild. But more than that, I didn't even have a foundation to work from. I was bouncing from place to place, living out of a car and other people's guest rooms, with no home base, no address I could call mine, no stable ground to stand on while I figured out next steps. My head requires structure, always has. I cannot build anything, not a job search, not a business, not a life, when I'm moving every few weeks with nowhere to land. That's what people who haven't been there don't understand. It's not about being above anything. It's that you can't rebuild from zero when zero doesn't even include a floor. If I had a home, one place, mine, stable, I could hit the ground running. I could apply for anything, take anything, build from there, even a shop job. But you need the foundation first. You need somewhere to stand. I didn't even have that. This woman had received millions in her divorce, had bought properties, hadn't worked since before her kids were born, and her kids were now in their 30s. She had been handed her stability and held it for decades without ever having to rebuild from nothing. She couldn't possibly know what it felt like to have no floor. And yet here she was, at our last dinner, suggesting I lower my expectations. I said, "Don't judge me." I didn't say much more about it. I hugged Melissa goodbye. I got in the car. Somewhere on the drive back, I put on Mel Robbins' The Let Them Theory. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just something to fill the miles, something that wasn't my own thoughts on a loop. And then chapter 16 arrived. The one about how to show up for someone going through grief or depression. Not to fix it, not to advise, not to judge or project or map your own experience onto theirs. Just to be an ear, to listen. To let grief have its own timeline without deciding what that timeline should look like from the outside. I sat with that for a long time on that highway. Melissa had been extraordinary. She had given me months of grace and presence and warmth that I don't have the words to properly thank her for. And she is human, and humans sometimes say the wrong thing, and one dinner doesn't undo months of showing up. I know that. I also know that grief has its own timeline. Mine does. Everyone's does. And that the people who love us sometimes forget that, even the good ones, even the best ones. Let them, Mel Robbins says. Let them be who they are. Angelica, who knew no other way of showing love than writing a check. Sophie, who couldn't find a way to be truly present even from a distance. The friends who never checked on me, not once, through any of it. I had spent months being hurt by all of it, tallying the absences, measuring the gaps between who people were and who I needed them to be. And what had that cost me? More energy I didn't have, more weight on a pile that was already crushing. The lesson wasn't that these people didn't love me. Maybe they did, in the ways they were capable of. The lesson was that I had been placing expectations on people who didn't have the tools to meet them, and then suffering when they didn't. That's not their failure. That's my expectation. And expectations, it turns out, are something I have some control over. And I had allowed this, all of it, to consume me, to cripple me, to throw me so far off track that I had spent months focusing on things I couldn't control instead of the one thing I could: myself. My actions, my next move. The narrative I was writing about who I was and what came next. That was the real work. Not the people who didn't show up. Not James and his silences. Not David and his choices. Not Angelica and her money and her cold arithmetic of hospitality. All of that, let them. Let them be exactly who they are and stop making their limitations my destruction. I wanted to start the new year fresh, reinvigorated, back to the woman I actually was underneath all of this. Bold, clear-eyed, the one who walked into rooms and owned them, who built things from nothing, who got what she wanted because she went out and made it happen. That woman hadn't gone anywhere. She had just been buried under a year of other people's limitations and her own grief and the particular paralysis that comes from having no floor to stand on. I was learning, slowly, badly, with a lot of resistance, but I was learning. Angelica's house in Westchester received me with a warmth that felt genuine, and probably was, at least on the surface. We cooked together the first week. Old recipes, the kind that come with muscle memory and shared history. We played games in the evenings. Her husband wasn't around much, which was probably for everyone's best interest. It was nice in the way that things can be nice when you're careful not to look too closely at what's underneath. But I felt it. The knife in the back. Always there, just below the surface of the warmth. But I buried it. A lesson I had to keep teaching myself. This was someone who had been my best friend for my entire life. My sister, my person, The one I had shown up for completely during her own 5-year divorce with no judgment and no conditions and no only a couple of weeks. And she had not once, in all of these months since August, called me or texted me to ask how I was. Not once. She called Melissa to check. She asked Courtney. She circled me from a distance like I was a problem she was managing, rather than a person she loved. I felt like a hostage. My entire life was in her basement. Boxes of clothes, product, the accumulated physical evidence of a life that had been packed up and had nowhere to go. If I said the wrong thing, if I pushed back, if I let my fire out the way I normally would, I risked not just the relationship, but the literal shelter of my belongings. So I bit my tongue. Again. Still. The lesson kept presenting itself in new forms, and I kept learning it the hard way. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. And that this is an excruciating thing to learn when your entire identity is built on saying exactly what you think. The silence unnerved her. It unnerves most people. When I go quiet, really quiet, not the polite quiet of someone listening, but the deep quiet of someone who has swallowed something they can't yet say. The people who know me well know something is wrong. My father always saw it in my eyes. My silence now does the same thing my eyes did then. It gives me away. And I don't know how to navigate that, how to put people at ease, how to communicate that the quiet isn't permanent, that it'll pass the way everything passes, that I just need to be allowed to move through it at my own pace without someone making it about them. She is good at deflecting. She grew up cultivating the art of turning things back on other people, and she is genuinely gifted at it. Anytime I have ever expressed a justified disappointment, she has found a way to make it about my failings rather than hers. I know this about her. I have always known this about her. I think she knows it about herself too. She just would never admit it. I just never imagined I would be in a position where I couldn't afford to say so. After a week back, I packed some things and headed for Noixie. Angelica invited us for Christmas. My kid and I gently declined. My blood was boiling. I want to say that clearly. Underneath the gentle decline, underneath the polite excuse, I was furious. If she hadn't been housing everything I owned in her basement, I would have told her exactly what I thought of her, and her Thanksgiving table, and her high-fiving, and her only 2 weeks. But she was, and so I said nothing. I smiled and declined and filed it away with everything else I was filing, and told myself that someday, when my life was no longer dependent on her goodwill, I would allow myself to feel the full weight of what she had done. Maybe that's the lesson in all of this. The tongue biting, the sitting with things I can't yet say. I have never been good at this. My whole life, I have said exactly what was on my mind, exactly when it was on my mind, and worn that as a badge of some kind. This entire process has been slowly, painfully teaching me otherwise. That restraint is not weakness. That silence, deployed correctly, is its own form of power. I'm still learning it. I resent having to learn it this way. Christmas time came and I went into the city to stay with my kid. It was extraordinary. That's the only word for it. We talked, really talked, the two of us, wandering through the city together, shopping, having long dinners at places that felt like the old us before everything got complicated. It was during this time, in person, that she told me her name. Not Colin anymore, Colleen, and that she wanted to be referred to as she and her. I sat with that. I am sitting with it still. I want to be honest here because this is an honest book. I was surprised. Not by the transition itself, I had processed that on the phone in November, but by the name, by the realness of it in person, by the speed of it all. Colleen has always moved fast, decided quickly, felt certain, and then recalibrated. This felt different from those patterns, more considered, more interior. And yet the speed still alarmed me. I had asked her to see a therapist for at least 6 months before starting hormones, just to sit with it fully, just to know herself completely before making permanent changes. She didn't love hearing it. I kept pressing, gently, carefully, the way you press when you're scared and trying not to show it. And then she said it, with complete certainty. Mom, you're never getting your son back. I stopped. I sat with that for a long time. I'm still sitting with it. It nearly killed me. Not because I don't want her to be who she is, but because grief doesn't ask permission. You can love someone completely and still grieve the version of them you knew. Both things are true simultaneously, and neither one cancels the other out. I was trying to hold both. I am still trying. I let it go after that, because she is an adult and she is my child, and both of those things are true simultaneously. And she had just told me, in the clearest possible terms, who she was. The least I could do was hear her. What I know is that she was happy in a way that was real, that there was something lighter about her that week in the city, some relief, some rightness, that I could see even through my own processing of it all. I held on to that. Whatever else I was feeling, she was lighter. That mattered. We stayed in the city through the new year, just the two of us. No real gifts, just presence. Wandering, eating, being in New York the way New York deserves to be inhabited, with full attention and nowhere else to be. It was quiet and warm and exactly what I needed, without knowing I needed it. New Year's Eve, I was sitting in my friend's apartment in the city. Colleen was in her room getting ready to go out. The city outside was doing what it does on New Year's Eve. Loud, relentless, celebrating the end of something and the beginning of something else. I thought about my mother. This was the first New Year's Eve without her. She would have called. She always called. A quick, warm check-in, her voice doing that thing it did when she was happy and wanted you to know it. I reached for my phone out of habit and then remembered and put it back down. The apartment was quiet except for the city outside. Colleen's door was closed. I sat with it for a moment, the absence of her, specific and permanent. And then I opened my laptop. I filed a motion for pendente lide alimony. James had stopped paying the bills entirely by this point, not just falling behind, stopped. Emails unanswered, texts ignored, negative balances left in accounts with my name on them. I had no choice but to go to the courts because he had left me no other option, and I was done apologizing for protecting myself. I filed it quietly while my daughter was out enjoying her young, vibrant life. As the city counted down outside, I closed the laptop and closed my eyes. One more thing done. One more step taken. One more version of myself I was slowly, painfully building from whatever was left. The holidays ended. I packed my bags again. One more week at Angelica's house, and then I would head to California, telling myself it would be different, telling myself I was going to find work there, regroup, get back to the version of myself that knew how to move through the world with momentum. I had been static for too long. I needed to move. I needed to find myself again in a place that was all too familiar with my heartbeat. New chapters of The Unraveling drop every Monday. We all have secrets, some we never say out loud. If you have a story that lives in the dark, obsession, betrayal, heartbreak, desire, reinvention, I want to hear it. Send me an email at lipservice68@gmail.com or find me on YouTube at Scarlett After Dark Official. Your secrets are safe with me. Let's tell your story.